The moment Duncan Quade saw the missing sheep grazing peacefully in his north pasture with a hulking figure standing guard over them, he knew his day was about to take an unexpected turn. He had spent the better part of 2 days searching the rocky hills and dense forest beyond his farm, certain that wolves or bears had claimed his small flock. Losing 6 sheep would have been devastating. He was barely managing as it was, a single man trying to work land that had been meant for a family. His father had built this homestead with dreams of sons and grandsons filling the fields, but Duncan had inherited it alone after fever took both his parents 3 winters past. Now, at 26, he worked from dawn until his hands bled, determined to prove he could make something of the land his father had loved. But there were his sheep, all 6 accounted for, looking none the worse for wear, and standing beside them, broad-shouldered and unmistakably orcish, was a woman who appeared to be waiting for him. Duncan approached cautiously, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He had seen orcs before they occasionally passed through the region, usually keeping to themselves, though stories of raids and violence made most humans view them with suspicion and fear. The local militia had chased off a band of orc hunters just last month, accusing them of stealing chickens from a neighboring farm. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the characteristic green skin that seemed to catch the afternoon sunlight. Her build was powerful, muscular in a way that spoke of hard living and physical labor. She wore simple clothing, a leather vest over a rough-spun tunic, trousers that had been patched multiple times, and boots that had seen better days. Her black hair was pulled back in a thick braid, and when she turned to face him fully, he could see the small tusks that protruded from her lower jaw, the pointed ears and eyes that were a startling shade of amber. She raised her hands slowly, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," she called out, her voice deeper than a human woman's but clear and steady. "I brought your sheep back." Duncan stopped about 10 feet away, trying to read her intentions. "You brought them back," he repeated carefully. "Does that mean you took them in the first place?" The orc woman's jaw tightened, and she looked away for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "Yes, I took them. 2 nights ago, I was—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. "I was hungry. Desperate. I've been traveling alone for weeks, and my supplies ran out. I saw your flock, and I took them without thinking of anything but my own need." Duncan felt anger flare in his chest. 2 days of worry, of imagining his livelihood destroyed, and she had simply stolen them because it was convenient? "You could have asked," he said, his voice hard. "You could have come to the door like any traveler seeking help." "Would you have helped?" She met his gaze squarely. "Would you have opened your door to an orc and offered food and kindness, or would you have set your dogs on me and raised the alarm to your neighbors?" The question hung in the air between them. Duncan wanted to say yes, that he would have helped, but honesty made him hesitate. He had grown up on stories of orc savagery, of burned villages and slaughtered families. His own father had fought in the border wars 20 years ago and carried scars from an orc blade. Would Duncan have welcomed her, or would he have turned her away, or worse? "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but you are here now, and you brought them back. Why?" The orc woman looked down at the sheep, who were contentedly cropping grass, oblivious to the tension. "Because I could not live with what I had done. I killed one I needed to eat, but when dawn came and I saw what I had taken from you, I felt," she struggled for words, "shame. Among my people, stealing from a fellow warrior is the gravest dishonor. I know humans do not see orcs as having honor, but we do, and I violated mine. So I gathered your sheep and I brought them back, and I come to apologize and to offer recompense." She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a handful of coins, silver and copper mixed together. "This is everything I have. It is not enough to replace what I took from you, I know, but it is all I can offer." Duncan stared at the money in her outstretched hand. It was not much, perhaps 3 silver pieces and a dozen coppers. Hardly enough to buy a sheep at market, let alone compensate for the worry and lost time. But the gesture itself meant something. She had come back, had brought his animals home, had offered what little she possessed to make amends. He thought of the mutton hanging in his smokehouse, the vegetables from his garden that were coming in faster than he could eat them, the half-wheel of cheese he had traded for last week. He thought of his empty house and his lonely table. He thought of the long nights with no one to talk to but the dog. "Keep your money," he said, surprising himself even as the words left his mouth. "Stay for supper instead." The orc woman's eyes widened, her hand frozen in mid-air. "What? You said you were hungry. I have food, more than I can eat alone, honestly, and you brought my sheep back, which is more than most would have done." He shifted his weight, suddenly feeling awkward. "I do not know your name. I am Duncan Quade. This is my farm." She lowered her hand slowly, closing her fingers around the coins. "I am called Grisha," she said. "Grisha of the Broken Tusk clan, or I was until they cast me out." "Cast you out? Why?" Grisha's expression hardened. "For showing weakness, for refusing to participate in a raid on a human settlement. My clan believes humans are lesser beings, fit only for conquest or death. I believed that once, too. But I saw children in that village, elders, people who had done no wrong. I could not bring myself to attack, and my clan saw that as betrayal. So they drove me out, and I have been wandering ever since, trying to find a place where an orc without a clan might survive." Duncan absorbed this, understanding more than she perhaps realized. He knew what it was to be alone, to try to make a way in a world that felt too large and too hostile. "Well," he said, "you can survive here for tonight at least. Come on. The sheep will be fine in this pasture, and I need to start cooking before it gets dark." He turned and began walking toward the farmhouse, half expecting her to refuse, to take her sheep and vanish into the forest. But after a moment, he heard footsteps behind him, and when he glanced back, Grisha was following, her expression a mixture of wariness and something that might have been hope. The farmhouse was modest but well built, stone and timber construction with a thatched roof that Duncan had repaired himself last autumn. Inside, the main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple, a table with 4 chairs, a pair of benches, shelves for dishes and supplies. A doorway led to the bedroom, and a ladder climbed to the loft where Duncan stored grain and tools. Grisha stopped just inside the doorway, looking around with the cautious alertness of someone who had learned not to trust shelter. "Your home is nice," she said, as if unused to offering compliments. "It serves," Duncan replied. He moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire, adding logs until flames crackled cheerfully. "Have a seat. I will put something together." She sat at the table, her movements careful, as if afraid of taking up too much space. Duncan found himself acutely aware of her presence as he worked the way she watched him with those amber eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet way she breathed. He had not had a guest in this house since his parents died. He had forgotten what it felt like to share space with another person. He pulled down smoked sausages, onions, carrots, and a loaf of bread he had baked 2 days ago. There was butter from his cow, cheese, and a jug of apple cider he had pressed last fall. He set a pot over the fire and began chopping vegetables, falling into the familiar rhythm of cooking. "Can I help?" Grisha asked after a few minutes of silence. Duncan glanced at her, surprised. "If you like. Can you slice bread?" She nodded and came to stand at the counter, taking the knife he offered. Her hands were large and strong, scarred from old wounds, but she handled the knife with practiced ease, cutting even slices with surprising delicacy. "You have cooked before," Duncan observed. "I had to learn after being cast out. Before there were always others to share duties. But alone," she shrugged. "You learn or you starve." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the sizzle of meat and vegetables in the pot. Duncan found himself relaxing slightly. Whatever else Grisha might be, she did not seem dangerous. Not here, not now. "How long have you been alone on this farm?" Grisha asked as Duncan stirred the stew. 3 years. My parents died of fever. There was no one else. I'm their only child." "That must be difficult. Orcs are not meant to live alone. Neither are humans, I think." "No," Duncan agreed quietly. "We are not." When the stew was ready, Duncan ladled generous portions into wooden bowls and set them on the table with the bread and butter. Grisha ate with obvious hunger, but also with manners, thanking him quietly before starting. He poured cider for both of them and sat across from her, suddenly unsure what to say. "This is good," Grisha said after a few bites. "Very good, thank you." "You're welcome. It is nice to cook for someone besides myself." They ate, and slowly, conversation began to flow more easily. Duncan asked about her travels, and Grisha told him of the places she had seen: mountains to the north where snow never melted, forests so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground, rivers that ran swift and cold with meltwater. She spoke of the difficulty of finding work, of being turned away from villages and farms, of sleeping in caves and under trees. "It sounds like a hard life," Duncan said. "It is, but it is mine. I chose it over participating in cruelty. I would make the same choice again." That took courage. Grisha looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "So does inviting an orc into your home. Your neighbors would not approve." "My neighbors are 2 miles away and mind their own business," Duncan said with a slight smile, "and I've never been good at doing what others expect." "That is something we have in common, then." They talked until the fire burned low and the moon rose outside the windows. Duncan found himself genuinely enjoying her company. Grisha was intelligent and observant, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She asked about his farm, about the crops he grew and the animals he kept, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. In turn, she told him about orc customs, about the clan structure, and the rigid hierarchies that governed their society. "It sounds complicated," Duncan said. "It is. Everything is about strength and honor, and proving yourself worthy. There is no room for doubt or compassion. Those are seen as weaknesses." She paused, staring into her cup. "I used to believe that. I thought strength was the only virtue that mattered. But then I saw what that belief led to, and I could not be part of it anymore." "What changed your mind?" Grisha was quiet for a long moment. "There was a girl in that village, human, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was carrying water from a well when our warriors surrounded the settlement. She dropped her bucket and ran, and she fell. She was crying, terrified, and one of my clan brothers laughed. He thought her fear was amusing, and I looked at her and I saw—" She swallowed. "I saw a child, just a child, not an enemy, not prey. A person. And I knew I could not hurt her. I could not hurt any of them." Duncan felt something tighten in his chest. "You saved them?" "I tried. I stood between my clan and the village gate. I told them I would not move, that they would have to go through me. It broke the moment, made them hesitate long enough for the villagers to flee and for the militia to arrive. But my clan saw it as betrayal. That night, they held a judgment circle, and the chieftain declared me clanless. I was beaten and driven out, told that if I ever returned, I would be killed." "I am sorry," Duncan said, and meant it. "Do not be. I am free now, poor, alone, and unwelcome almost everywhere, but free." The fire had burned down to embers. Duncan rose and added another log, suddenly aware of how late it had grown. "You should stay the night," he said. "It is not safe to travel in the dark, and you have nowhere else to go." Grisha looked at him searchingly. "You would trust an orc to sleep under your roof? You brought my sheep back and offered to pay for your mistake. That tells me more about your character than your race does. Your kindness is unexpected. I do not know how to repay it." "You do not need to repay it. Just—" he hesitated. "Just rest. You look like you have not had a safe place to sleep in a long time." Tears gleamed suddenly in Grisha's eyes, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. "Thank you," she whispered. Duncan gave her the bedroom, insisting over her protests. He took blankets and made himself a pallet by the fire, comfortable enough and warmer than the bedroom anyway. As he lay in the firelight, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. Harboring an orc, even briefly, would be seen as dangerous foolishness by anyone who learned of it. But something in Grisha's story had touched him. She had sacrificed everything for her principles, and she had come back to make amends even when it would have been easier to disappear. That was not the action of a monster. Duncan woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went about his morning chores quietly so as not to wake his guest. He milked the cow, fed the chickens, checked on the sheep. The world was soft and gray with pre-dawn light, the air cool and fresh. He found himself wondering if Grisha would be gone when he returned to the house, slipped away in the night to continue her wandering. But when he carried the milk bucket back inside, she was standing by the fireplace, having rebuilt the fire and set water to boil. She had braided her hair again and looked more rested than she had the night before. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you do not mind. I thought I could make myself useful." Not at all, thank you. They made breakfast together, porridge with honey, bread and butter, eggs from the chickens. It felt strangely domestic, this quiet morning routine with another person. Duncan had grown so accustomed to solitude that he had forgotten the small pleasures of shared meals and easy conversation. "What will you do now?" Duncan asked as they ate. "Where will you go?" Grisha set down her spoon, her expression troubled. "I do not know. I have been traveling aimlessly for 2 months now, looking for work, for anywhere that might accept me. But orcs are not welcome in human lands, and I cannot return to my own people. I suppose I will keep moving until I find something, or until my luck runs out." Duncan made a decision that surprised him even as he spoke. "What if you stayed here? For a while at least." She stared at him. "What?" "I could use help on the farm. There's more work than one person can manage, and harvest season is coming. I cannot pay much, but I can offer food, shelter, and honest work, if you want it." "Duncan, I cannot your neighbors, the people in town. They do not need to know. This farm is isolated. If you stay close to the property, no one will see you. And even if they did, I am allowed to hire workers. It is not illegal. But I'm an orc. And I'm a man who needs help bringing in his crops. Does the rest of it matter so much?" Grisha looked at him with an expression he could not read, something between hope and disbelief. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. For all you know, I could rob you, or worse. You could have done that already. You could have disappeared with my sheep or slit my throat in my sleep, but you did not. You came back to make things right, and you have been nothing but honest with me. That is enough." She was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the offer. Finally, she said, "If I stay, I will earn my keep. I will work harder than any hand you have ever hired. I will not be a burden." "I do not doubt it." "Then, yes, I will stay. Thank you." Duncan felt an unexpected lightness in his chest, a sense of rightness he had not anticipated. "Good. Welcome to the farm, Grisha." The next few days fell into a pattern that felt both strange and natural. Duncan showed Grisha around the property, explaining the work that needed doing. She proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker. Her orcish strength meant she could handle tasks that would have taken Duncan hours. She repaired a section of fence in an afternoon, carried water from the well without needing to rest, and helped him clear a field of rocks that he had been putting off for months. But it was not just her physical strength that impressed him. Grisha was clever and resourceful, often finding solutions to problems that Duncan had struggled with. When the plow broke, she fashioned a temporary repair using wire and wood that held better than Duncan's previous fix. When crows began raiding the vegetable garden, she rigged a series of noisemakers that kept them away. In the evenings, they would cook together and talk. Grisha told him more about orc culture, the songs and stories, the traditions and beliefs. Duncan shared memories of his parents, of growing up on this farm, of the dreams he had for making it prosper. They played cards using a worn deck Duncan's father had owned, and Grisha proved to be a terrible player, but a good sport about losing. "You are much better at this than I am," she admitted after Duncan won their 5th game in a row. "It is not about being good. It is about having fun." "Fun," Grisha repeated as if testing the word. "I am not sure I remember how to have fun. Everything was so serious in the clan. Every moment was about proving yourself, about competing for status. There was no time for simple enjoyment." "Then we will have to relearn together. I've been so focused on survival these past 3 years that I forgot about living." She smiled at that, a genuine expression that softened her features and made her look younger. Duncan found himself noticing details he had not before, the way her amber eyes caught the firelight, the graceful way she moved despite her size, the musical quality of her laugh when something genuinely amused her. He caught himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, looking forward to seeing her at meals. It was concerning. He had not expected to feel anything beyond gratitude for the help, but there was something more, something that made his heart beat faster when she smiled at him, something that made the house feel less empty. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Grisha had arrived, Duncan made the trip to town for supplies. He went alone, as they had agreed it was safer if no one knew about his house guest. The trip took most of the day, and he hurried through his shopping, eager to get back. In the general store, he ran into Marcus Holt, a neighboring farmer who had land about 3 miles east. "Duncan, good to see you. How's the farm treating you?" "Well enough. Getting ready for harvest." "I hear you. Say, you did not happen to see any orcs passing through your land, did you? There have been reports of a lone orc in the area. Male, supposedly, tall and dangerous looking. Sheriff is asking everyone to keep watch." Duncan's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "I have not seen anyone. You know my land is pretty isolated." "That it is. Still, keep your rifle close, just in case. Orcs are not to be trusted. My father always said the only good orc is a dead orc." Duncan forced a smile and finished his shopping as quickly as possible. On the ride home, he felt sick with worry. If people were looking for an orc in the area, it was only a matter of time before someone saw Grisha or came investigating. He had been naive to think they could keep her presence secret indefinitely. When he arrived home, Grisha was working in the garden, pulling weeds. She looked up as he approached, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" He told her about the conversation in town. Grisha's face went carefully blank as she listened. "I should leave," she said when he finished. "I have put you in danger by being here. If anyone learns you are harboring an orc, they could arrest you, or worse. Where will you go? You have no money, no supplies. I will manage. I did before. And nearly starved. No, I'm not sending you away." "Duncan, you do not understand. If they find me here, they will not just send me away. They will kill me, and they will punish you for helping me. I will not let that happen. And I will not let you wander alone and defenseless when you have done nothing wrong." He took a breath, trying to calm himself. "We will be more careful. You will stay close to the house, out of sight. If anyone comes, you can hide in the root cellar. We will make this work." "Why are you doing this?" Grisha's voice was anguished. "Why risk so much for me?" The question hung between them, and Duncan realized he did not have a simple answer. It was not just about helping someone in need anymore. It was about Grisha specifically, about the way she made him feel less alone, about the quiet joy he found in her company. "Because," he said carefully, "you have become a friend, and I do not abandon my friends." Grisha looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she nodded. "Very well. I will stay for now, but I will be careful, I promise." They were more cautious after that. Grisha kept to the farm, staying out of sight of the road. She worked mostly in the early mornings and evenings, when shadows would hide her from any passing travelers. Duncan made excuses to go to town less often, stretching their supplies as far as possible. But despite the increased danger, or perhaps because of it, they grew closer. There was an intimacy in the shared secret, in the knowledge that they were protecting each other. Duncan found himself increasingly aware of Grisha's presence, of the sound of her voice, of the rare moments when she let her guard down and laughed freely. One evening, after a long day of work preparing the fields for harvest, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was warm and still. "I have been thinking," Grisha said quietly, "about what happens after harvest. The work will slow down then. You will not need help as much." Duncan's chest tightened. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "I'm saying you may want me to. This arrangement cannot last forever, Duncan. Eventually, someone will see me. Eventually, there will be trouble. We will deal with trouble if it comes. You are a stubborn man." "So I've been told." She was quiet for a moment. In orc culture, there is a concept called karash. It means a bond forged through hardship, a friendship that is tested and proven through difficulty. It is one of the most sacred relationships in our society. I think what we have is karash. You are more than a friend to me, Duncan. You are someone I would stand beside in battle, someone I would trust with my life." Duncan felt warmth spread through him at her words. "That means a great deal, Grisha. You are the same to me." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes serious. "I need you to understand something. Among orcs, karash is often a precursor to something deeper, a romantic bond, and She hesitated, then pushed on. "I feel things for you that I should not, things that are complicated and confusing. I have never felt this way about anyone, least of all a human, but you are kind and brave and good, and when I am with you, I feel safe in a way I have never felt before. I do not expect you to return these feelings. I know the idea of an orc and a human together is probably repulsive to you, but I needed to be honest. Duncan's heart was pounding. He had not expected this, had not let himself acknowledge his own growing feelings, had certainly not imagined that Grisha might feel the same way. It is not repulsive, he said quietly. It is terrifying and complicated and would be met with hostility by everyone around us. But it is not repulsive. Grisha stared at him. Are you saying? I am saying I have feelings for you too. I have for a while now, but I thought I was alone in them. I thought you would think I was taking advantage, or that you would be offended by the suggestion. You are beautiful and strong, and the bravest person I have ever met. When I wake up, the first thing I think about is seeing you. When I go to sleep, you are my last thought. I do not know what that means or where it can go, but I cannot pretend it is not real. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the confession hanging in the air between them. Then Grisha reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and took his hand. Her palm was warm and calloused against his, her grip careful as if afraid of hurting him. I do not know where this can go either, she said, but I want to find out, if you are willing. Duncan squeezed her hand. I am willing. They sat like that as the sun set completely and stars began to emerge, hands joined, two people who should have been enemies finding something neither had expected. The next few weeks were the happiest Duncan could remember since his parents had died. He and Grisha worked side by side during the day, their labor efficient and comfortable. In the evenings they would talk or play games or simply sit together, learning about each other in the way new couples do. They discovered shared interests, both loved the forest, both enjoyed working with their hands, both had a quiet sense of humor that others often missed. Physical affection came slowly, cautiously. A held hand became an arm around shoulders, became eventually stolen kisses when the evening grew late. Grisha was tentative at first, worried about her tusks, about her strength, about the ways she was different from a human woman. But Duncan found those differences fascinating rather than frightening. He loved the way her skin seemed to shimmer faintly in moonlight, the way her ears twitched when she was thinking, the low rumble in her voice when she whispered his name. I never thought I could have this, Grisha confessed one night as they lay together on a blanket under the stars. Duncan had his arm around her, and she was nestled against his side, her head on his shoulder. I thought I would be alone forever, wandering from place to place, never belonging anywhere. You belong here, Duncan said, with me, for as long as you want to stay. What if I want to stay forever? Then I would be the luckiest man alive. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You really mean that? Every word. She kissed him then, deep and thorough, and Duncan felt like his heart might burst from the joy of it. Harvest season arrived, and they worked from dawn until dusk, bringing in the wheat and barley. It was backbreaking labor, but with Grisha's help, they finished in half. The time it had taken Duncan alone in previous years. The barn was full, the grain stored safely away, and Duncan had enough surplus to sell at market for a decent profit. We did well, he said as they surveyed their work. Better than I have ever done. I could not have managed this without you. We make a good team, Grisha agreed. The best. They were celebrating with cider and fresh bread when they heard horses approaching. Duncan's blood went cold. No one came out this way without a reason, and with the harvest in, there was no legitimate business anyone would have with him. The cellar, he said urgently. Now. Grisha moved quickly and quietly, lifting the trapdoor in the kitchen floor and descending into the root cellar. Duncan closed it behind her and threw a rug over the door. His heart was racing as he opened the front door, just as 3 men on horseback rode into the yard. He recognized 2 of them, Marcus Holt from town, and Deputy Sheridan, a young man who took his law enforcement duties very seriously. The third man he did not know, but he wore the rough clothing of a hunter or tracker. "Duncan!" Marcus called out. "Sorry to bother you so late." "No bother. What can I do for you?" "We are still looking for that orc, the one I mentioned last month. Well, a shepherd about 5 miles north saw tracks, big ones, too large for a human, led this way. This is Tom Barrett, best tracker in the county. He followed the trail to your land." Tom Barrett was studying the ground, his weathered face thoughtful. "Trail goes right up to your barn," he said. "Recent, too, within the last few weeks. Duncan forced himself to remain calm. "I have not seen any orcs. You're welcome to look around if you want." "Appreciate that," Deputy Sheridan said, dismounting. "Just being thorough, you understand?" The three men spread out, checking the barn, the sheds, even peering through the windows of the house. Duncan stood in the doorway, his muscles tense, praying that Grisha stayed quiet in the cellar. He could hear them moving around, their voices muted as they discussed what they found. Tom Barrett examined the ground near the house, frowning. "Definitely large footprints here, bigger than any human I've seen. And there are signs of someone living in your barn hay, arranged like bedding, recent fire pit." Duncan thought fast. "I had a hired hand for harvest. Big fellow, but human. He left 2 days ago after we finished." "Can we talk to him? Get his name?" "He called himself John Smith. Did not ask for details. I needed the help, and he was willing to work." Marcus frowned. "John Smith. That is convenient. Look, I'm sorry I cannot be more helpful, but I have not seen any orcs. If this hired hand was an orc in disguise, I certainly could not tell. He did the work, I paid him, and he left." Deputy Sheridan exchanged glances with the others. "All right, Duncan, but if you do see anything, you need to report it immediately. Harboring an orc is a serious crime." "I understand." They mounted up and left, though Tom Barrett kept looking back at the house as if he suspected something. Duncan waited until they were well out of sight before he opened the cellar door. Grisha emerged, her face pale. "They know I am here. They suspect. They do not know for certain. That tracker, he will keep looking. He will find more evidence, and next time, they will search more thoroughly. They might find the cellar." Duncan knew she was right. They had been lucky this time, but luck would not hold forever. "We need to think. We need a plan. The only plan that makes sense is for me to leave, tonight, before they come back." "No." "Duncan, I said no. I'm not losing you. There has to be another way." They spent hours discussing options, each more desperate than the last. Grisha could hide in the forest, but she would be vulnerable and alone. They could try to reach orc territory, but it was hundreds of miles away, and Grisha was clanless. She would not be welcome there. They could run to a city, try to lose themselves in the crowds, but orcs were even more conspicuous in cities than in the countryside. "What if we legitimized it?" Duncan said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "What if we got married?" Grisha stared at him. "Married? Think about it. You would be my wife. That is different from harboring a fugitive. We would have legal protection. They could not just take you away or arrest me without cause. And there are precedents. Mixed marriages are rare, but they exist. There are laws protecting them. Duncan, marriage is not something you do as a legal strategy. It is supposed to be about love, about commitment. And it would be. Grisha, I love you. I have been too afraid to say it, but it is true. I want to spend my life with you. I was already thinking about asking you eventually. This just means asking now instead of later." Tears were streaming down Grisha's face. "You cannot mean this. Your life would be so much harder with an orc wife. People would shun you, hate you, maybe even attack you. Everything would be more complicated." "Everything is already complicated, and I would rather have a complicated life with you than an easy life without you. Grisha, will you marry me?" She was crying openly now, and Duncan was surprised to find his own eyes damp. She pulled him into an embrace that nearly lifted him off his feet, and he could feel her shaking. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They held each other in the dim light of the kitchen, two people who had found each other against all odds, committing to a future that would be difficult and uncertain, but undeniably their own. The next morning, Duncan hitched up his wagon, and they set out for the county seat. It was a full day's travel, and they attracted stares and whispers everywhere they stopped. Grisha sat proud and straight beside him, her hand in his, refusing to be cowed by the hostility they encountered. At the county clerk's office, the bureaucrat behind the desk looked up and blanched when he saw Grisha. "We would like to file for a marriage license," Duncan said firmly. "A marriage license between a human and an orc. Yes, is there a legal prohibition against that?" The clerk fumbled through his books. "Well, no, not specifically, but it is highly irregular. I will need to verify the procedures." It took 3 hours and multiple consultations with the county magistrate, but eventually they walked out with a marriage license. The ceremony itself was brief and perfunctory, performed by a judge who clearly disapproved but could not find legal grounds to refuse. Duncan had brought his mother's wedding ring, a simple silver band that he'd carried in his pocket for days, hoping for a chance to give it to Grisha. It was too small for her fingers, but she wore it on a chain around her neck, pressed close to her heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge said sourly. "May God have mercy on your souls." Duncan did not care about the judge's opinion. He kissed his wife, and Grisha kissed him back, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. The ride home was long and tiring, but Duncan felt lighter than he had in years. He had a wife, a partner, someone to share his life with. The future was still uncertain, still fraught with challenges, but they would face it together. When they arrived home after dark, exhausted but happy, they found Deputy Sheridan waiting in their yard. Duncan's heart sank, but he helped Grisha down from the wagon, and they approached together. "Deputy," Duncan said, "this is my wife, Grisha Quade. We were married today." Sheridan's eyes widened. "Your wife? That is correct? Do you have business with us?" The deputy struggled for words. I came to arrest her, the orc, for trespassing and theft." "You mean my wife? Who stole some sheep, returned them, and made restitution? That is a civil matter at best, and as her husband, I have declined to press charges. But she is an orc. She is my wife. That's a legal relationship recognized by this county and this territory. Unless you have some other charge, I suggest you leave our property." Sheridan looked between them, clearly at a loss. Finally he said, "This is not over. People are not going to accept this. That is their problem, not ours. Good evening, Deputy." They watched him ride away, and Duncan felt Grisha's hand tighten on his. "He is right," she said. "This will not be easy." "I know, but I meant what I said. We are in this together." The next few months tested that resolve. Their marriage became the talk of the region, met with everything from curious fascination to outright hostility. Some neighbors stopped speaking to Duncan entirely. Others came by to gawk or make snide comments. There was a period of about 2 weeks when someone kept leaving dead animals on their doorstep, a clear intimidation tactic. But there were small kindnesses too. The widow Thompson, who lived 5 miles south, brought them a pie and congratulated them quietly. A merchant in town who had always been fair with Duncan continued to do business with them, despite pressure from others. And slowly, very slowly, the overt hostility began to die down. People were still uncomfortable, still disapproving, but the novelty wore off, and they had other things to worry about. Duncan and Grisha built their life together. They worked the farm, expanding the fields and adding more livestock. Grisha's strength and Duncan's knowledge proved to be a powerful combination. Their yields increased, their animals thrived, and the farm began to prosper in ways it never had before. In the evenings, they would retreat into their home and shut out the world. They talked about everything and nothing, learned each other's languages, Duncan picking up Orcish words and phrases, Grisha becoming more fluent in the human dialect of the region. They created traditions of their own, blending human and orc customs. Grisha taught Duncan the songs of her people, and he shared the stories his mother had told him as a child. Physically, their relationship deepened as well. The initial caution gave way to passion and intimacy. Duncan learned what made Grisha gasp and sigh, and she learned the same about him. There was tenderness in their lovemaking, but also strength and fire. They were different in so many ways, but those differences complemented each other rather than dividing them. Winter came, and with it, isolation. The farm was cut off by snow, and they spent long months with only each other for company. But rather than strain their relationship, it strengthened it. They learned to navigate conflicts, to communicate, to support each other through difficult days. One night, as they lay in bed with the wind howling outside, Grisha said, "I am happy. I did not think I would ever be able to say that, but I am." Duncan pulled her closer. "So am I. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, making your life so much harder? Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Duncan Quade." "I love you too, Grisha Quade." Spring arrived, bringing with it new life and new challenges. Grisha discovered she was pregnant, a development that filled them both with joy and terror. Neither of them knew what to expect from a half-human, half-orc child. Would the pregnancy be difficult? Would the child be healthy? What would they look like? And how would the world treat them? They found answers in an unexpected place. A traveling healer passed through the region, an old woman who had seen much in her years. When she learned of Grisha's condition, she shared that she had delivered mixed-race children before. "It happens more often than people think," she said. "The pregnancy can be difficult. Orc babies are larger than human ones, but with proper care, both mother and child usually do fine. The children themselves are remarkable. They inherit strengths from both parents. Your child will be special." She stayed for a week, teaching them what to expect, giving them advice and herbal remedies. When she left, she refused payment. "I am old enough to remember when humans and orcs did not hate each other," she said, "when mixed communities existed and people lived in peace. Those days can come again, but only if there are those brave enough to build bridges. You two are doing that. It is an honor to help you." The pregnancy progressed. Grisha remained strong, working alongside Duncan until the final weeks when her belly grew too large to comfortably manage the heavier tasks. Duncan fretted and fussed over her, earning him both exasperation and affection. "I'm not made of glass," she would say. "I know, but you are carrying our child, and I'm allowed to worry." "You're allowed to be annoying, you mean?" "That too." When her time came, it was in the middle of a summer night. Duncan ran through the darkness to fetch the midwife, a practical woman named Sarah who had agreed to help despite her initial reservations about treating an orc. The labor was long and difficult, 12 hours of pain and effort, but when dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the house. Their daughter was perfect. She had her mother's green-tinged skin, lighter than a full orc, but unmistakably orcish. Her eyes were Duncan's blue-gray, and while she had the small tusks characteristic of orc children, her features were softened by human blood. She was strong and healthy, with a powerful cry and a grip that surprised everyone. "What will you name her?" Sarah asked as she cleaned up. Duncan and Grisha looked at each other. They had discussed names for months but had not settled on anything definitive. "Alara," Grisha said. "It means light-bringer in Orcish. She is the light we did not know we needed." "Alara Quade," Duncan said, testing the name. "It is perfect." He held his daughter, marveling at the tiny life they had created. She squirmed in his arms, already showing the strength she had inherited from her mother. Love overwhelmed him, fierce and protective. He would do anything for this child, would face any challenge to keep her safe. The arrival of Alara marked a shift in how some people viewed Duncan and Grisha. A child made their relationship real in a way that marriage alone had not. Some remained hostile, but others softened. Children had a way of breaking down barriers. The widow Thompson brought baby clothes. The merchant in town gave them a discount on supplies, slipping Duncan an extra coin with a wink. Even some who had been coldly polite began to show genuine warmth. Not everyone approved. There were still those who muttered about abominations and sins, but Duncan and Grisha ignored them, focusing on their daughter and their farm and the life they were building. Alara grew quickly, showing hybrid vigor that surprised everyone. By 6 months, she was crawling with determination, getting into everything. By a year, she was walking and babbling in a mix of human words and Orcish grunts. She was fearless and curious, keeping both parents constantly on their toes. "She is going to be a handful," Duncan said one evening, as they watched Alara toddle around the yard, investigating every rock and plant. "She is like her mother," Grisha said with a smile, "strong-willed and determined. And like her father, too curious for her own good. Then she will be extraordinary." Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. The farm thrived under their joint care. Alara grew healthy and happy. They had friends few, but genuine. The widow Thompson became something of a grandmother figure to Alara, stopping by regularly to visit. The merchant in town, whose name was Peter, proved to be a staunch ally, defending them against criticism and helping them navigate the social complexities of the region. When Alara was 2, they received an unexpected visitor. A young orc man appeared at their farm one evening, travel-worn and cautious. Grisha tensed when she saw him, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. "Peace," the orc said, raising his hands. "I mean no harm. I'm looking for Grisha of the Broken Tusk clan. I am Grisha. I have no clan. I know. I am Thrak. I was cast out 6 months ago for refusing to kill human prisoners. I've been searching for you because I heard stories. Stories of a clanless orc who married a human and built a new life. I needed to know if it was true. Grisha relaxed slightly. It is true. This is my husband, Duncan, and our daughter, Alara. Thrak's eyes widened as he looked at the child. Half human, half orc. I have never seen such a thing. She is beautiful. What do you want, Thrak? Grisha asked, still wary. I want what you have found. A place to belong. A life that is not about violence and conquest. I am tired of being alone. I'm tired of being hated. If you could find acceptance here, maybe I could too. Duncan and Grisha exchanged glances. They knew what it was to be alone, to be desperate for belonging, and they had more work than 2 people could manage now with a toddler to care for. There is a cabin about a mile north, Duncan said. It is old and needs repair, but it is livable. If you are willing to work to help on the farm, we can give you a place to stay and food to eat. We cannot pay much, but we can offer you what we have. Thrak's eyes gleamed with unshed tears. I would be honored. So their household expanded. Thrak proved to be a hard worker and a gentle soul. He was good with Alara, who adored her uncle Thrak, and would follow him around, chattering in her mixed language. He helped expand the farm further, allowing them to take on projects they had only dreamed of before. Word spread quietly through the orc diaspora. Other clanless orcs began to appear, seeking refuge and community. Duncan and Grisha were careful they could not take in everyone, and some who came were not suited for peaceful farm life. But over the course of 2 years, 3 more orc families settled in the area, forming a small community on the frontier. It was unprecedented. Humans and orcs living together, working together, building something new. There were tensions and challenges. Old prejudices died hard, but slowly, grudgingly, it worked. The orcs were respectful of their neighbors, helpful in times of need. When a bad storm damaged several farms in the region, the orcs were among the first to offer aid, their strength invaluable in the rebuilding effort. When bandits threatened the area, the orcs fought alongside the human militia, proving their loyalty. Duncan and Grisha became leaders of this small community, not because they sought power, but because they had proven that coexistence was possible. Their home became a gathering place where human and orc children played together, where adults shared meals and stories, where new friendships were forged. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Duncan and Grisha stood on their porch watching the sunset. Alara was playing in the yard with a mixed group of human and orc children, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Thrak and his wife, he had married a human woman from the next county over, were visiting, along with several other families. Did you ever imagine this? Grisha asked, leaning against Duncan's shoulder. When you invited me to stay for supper that first night? No, Duncan admitted. I just saw someone who needed help. I never imagined it would lead to all this. Are you glad it did? He kissed her temple. Every day. You are my greatest adventure, Grisha. The best decision I ever made. I was so afraid that night, afraid you would turn me away or turn me in. I thought my life was over, but you gave me hope, and then you gave me love, and then you gave me a future I never dreamed possible. We gave each other those things. Neither of us would be here without the other. They watched as Alara ran up to them, her face flushed with happiness. Mama, Papa, come play. We will be right there, Grisha said, lifting their daughter into her arms. Alara giggled, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. Duncan looked at his wife and daughter, at the community they had helped create, at the life they had built from impossible beginnings. It had started with stolen sheep and an apology, with an invitation to supper extended on impulse. But it had become something far greater, a testament to the possibility of change, of compassion, of love transcending boundaries that others insisted were absolute. The road had not been easy. They had faced opposition, hatred, and fear. There were still those who disapproved, still challenges ahead. But they had each other, and they had built something strong enough to weather any storm. As the sun set and the stars emerged, Duncan took his wife's hand and his daughter's hand, and they walked together into the yard to join their friends. The evening air was full of laughter and warmth, the sound of multiple languages blending together, the sight of different peoples finding common ground. This was the future they had chosen. Not easy, but good. Not perfect, but theirs. And as Duncan Quade looked around at everything they had created, he knew with absolute certainty that he would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. The orc woman had returned his stolen livestock with an apology, and he had asked her to stay for supper instead. That simple act of kindness had transformed both of their lives, had rippled outward to touch dozens of others, had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged with courage and compassion. Years passed and their story became legend in the region, not a tale of grand heroism or epic battles, but something quieter and perhaps more powerful, the story of two people who chose love over fear, who built community in the face of opposition, who proved that the things that united people were stronger than the things that divided them. Alara grew into a strong, confident young woman, proud of both sides of her heritage. She became a teacher, helping other mixed-race children navigate a world that did not always understand them. She married a human man who loved her for exactly who she was, and they gave Duncan and Grisha grandchildren who carried the legacy of integration forward into a new generation. The small community of mixed families grew and prospered. The farm that Duncan had once struggled to maintain alone became the center of a thriving agricultural cooperative, humans and orcs working together to feed the growing population of the frontier. The old prejudices did not disappear, they were too deeply rooted for that, but they faded, softened by daily contact and genuine relationships. Duncan and Grisha grew old together, their hands weathered by decades of work, their faces lined with years of laughter and occasional tears. They would sit on the same porch, where they had first admitted their feelings for each other, watching the sunset over land they had cultivated together, surrounded by the family and community they had built. "No regrets?" Grisha would ask sometimes, an echo of conversations from long ago. "Not a single one," Duncan would always reply. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner." When Duncan Quade died at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep with Grisha's hand in his, the funeral was attended by more than 100 people, humans and orcs alike. They came to honor a man who had seen past surface differences to the person beneath, who had offered kindness when the world demanded suspicion, who had built bridges instead of walls. Grisha lived another 5 years, cared for by Alara and the extended family that had grown from that first improbable union. She never remarried, saying that she had been blessed with one great love in her life, and that was more than most people ever received. When she passed, she was buried beside Duncan, their graves marked with a single stone that bore both human and orcish symbols, a final testament to the life they had shared. The story of the orc woman who returned stolen livestock and was invited to stay for supper became part of local folklore, told and retold to new generations. Some versions embellished the tale with drama and danger. Others focused on the romance. But the core truth remained that love and compassion had the power to change the world, one meal, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. And on the farm that Duncan and Grisha had built together, life continued. New families worked the land, mixing human ingenuity with orcish strength. Children of mixed heritage played in the fields their grandparents had planted. The small community grew into a town, and that town became known as a place of tolerance and cooperation, a beacon of what the future could hold if people chose to see each other as individuals rather than as representatives of their races. The old farmhouse still stood, preserved as a historical site, and visitors would come to see where it all began. They would stand in the kitchen where Duncan had first offered a meal to a desperate stranger. They would walk the fields where human and orc had labored side by side. They would read the letters and journals that documented the early years, filled with hope and fear and determination. And they would leave understanding that the greatest changes often began with the smallest gestures, that the most powerful revolutions started not with violence, but with an open door and a simple invitation. Stay for supper instead. The legacy of Duncan Quade and Grisha Quade lived on, not in monuments or grand declarations, but in the lives of those who had been touched by their example, in the children who grew up knowing that differences were something to celebrate rather than fear, in the slow but steady progress toward a world where the barriers between peoples might one day disappear entirely. It had all started with 6 stolen sheep, an apology, and a man who chose mercy over anger, who saw a person in need rather than an enemy to fear. From that single moment of compassion, an entire community had grown, a new way of living had been born, and 2 lonely souls had found the love and belonging they had both been seeking. The sun continued to rise and set over the land they had loved. The seasons turned, bringing growth and harvest, snow and renewal. And in the hearts of those who remembered, Duncan and Grisha's story remained alive, a reminder that the world could be changed, one act of kindness at a time, one meal shared, one hand extended in friendship instead of raised in anger. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and the passage of time. But what they had built endured, woven into the fabric of the community they had created, a permanent testament to the truth that love was stronger than hate, that courage could overcome prejudice, and that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply to invite someone different to stay for supper and see where the conversation led. In the end, Duncan and Grisha's greatest achievement was not the prosperous farm or the thriving community or even their remarkable daughter and her descendants. It was the simple proof that 2 people from different worlds could find common ground, could build a life together, and could, through their example, show others that such things were possible. Their love story became a foundation stone for a better future, one where the divisions that had seemed so absolute might finally begin to heal, where children of all races could grow up as friends rather than enemies, where the old hatreds might give way to new understanding. And it all began on an ordinary day, when an orc woman returned stolen livestock with an apology, and a lonely farmer said the words that changed everything. Stay for supper instead.